Sophie Schneideman
Hello.
is antiquarian book dealer specializing in fine press, private press.
Yes, the art of the book, private press, illustrated books, calligraphy, fine binding, typography, anything to do with the art of the book, really.
That's wonderful. You like doing that?
I love doing that. Absolutely love it.
Why is that?
I just love dealing with beautiful things, and I really enjoy the people who make them, the more modern stuff, finding out about the people who used to make them. Also, the people who collect them tend to be really wonderful people in touch with their artistic side and understand the beauty of things. It makes life a better place.
Yeah. That's a pretty good reason.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you been doing it?
Nearly 30 years. Yes, quite a long time. First I left university and ended up very quickly working for Maggs Brothers in Berkeley Square then. And I went to just answer the phones and ended up staying for 17 years. And then in 2007, I started my own business, just so I could be more focused, really, on exactly what I wanted to do.
Okay. And so how did you get going? How did you start it?
On a wing and a prayer. I think life is a tiny bit easier then than it is now. It was just a year before it would have become hard because of the downturn in 2008.
Yeah.
But I literally went across the road. I had no money, and I went across the road from Maggs in Berkeley Square to my bank, which was across the other side of the street, and said, "Oh, you wouldn't give me an overdraft to set up my own business?" And I just, by chance, got one of those very old-fashioned bank managers who actually did an assessment of whether you would be able to succeed. And he gave me an overdraft for a small amount, and I borrowed a lot. I borrowed books from people and
to sell them on consignment.
And to run them from one person to another or whatever. And
what does that mean?
So you might take a book from a dealer to take to a customer, and you make a little cut on it as you sell it, but they can't sell it, so they're very happy for you to go to their your customer with their book and make a cut.
I see. Okay.
And I don't know.
So you developed relationships with other booksellers.
And which obviously I'd already been in the business for 17 years, so it's not like somebody starting out on their own, which I really admire. I think that it was risky, but I just for some reason felt I could do it and took a deep breath and hoped the mortgage would be paid. But there's nothing like that kind of fear actually to make you work a lot harder. And there is no real secret to this trade. It's just if you work hard, things happen. If you don't, which a lot don't, then
okay, but tell me about working hard. What work do you do?
So you're always looking out for things. I believe that if you stay static in your shop or your home, nothing is going to happen. You have to be out there sniffing around, looking at things all the time. So every fair you can possibly go to, every bookshop you should go to, you should meet people, you should go to libraries, look at their exhibitions, try and meet the librarians. Always be in a place where you could meet people that might be good for your business.
And so you would just, in most of these cases, you'd say, "Hi, I'm in the fine press, private press, art of the book business.
Yeah.
I buy and sell, and keep me in mind the next time you've got either of those things to do." Yeah.
I mean, pretty much. But I mean, obviously, as I said, I did have the benefit of having been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And also that I've been travelling internationally for a long time, so I already thought of myself instantly as an international dealer, which I think has helped me a great deal, that I was always working towards that I wanted to go abroad and sell things abroad, and actually that does help your business enormously through all the ups and downs. You might not be doing well in one place, but another place is doing just fine. And I think, that whole attitude of, and maybe arrogance of being in a big firm has helped me enormously.
And so, traveling internationally, you go to the book fairs primarily and sell books?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I've got a family, so I would say that I'm quite limited as to how much I can do. So, whereas some other dealers are able to sort of hang around for a week afterwards and go and see librarians and whatever, I really can't do that. I've got children at school, I have to get back. But, I do what I can, and I do several fairs every year. I do 3 in America, I do 1 in Hong Kong, occasionally I do 1 in Australia.
Which ones do you do in America?
So primarily I do California and New York, and I've done Boston once before, and I'm doing it again this year. And
which is the best one for you? Oh, they vary.
The best fair in all for me is Hong Kong. But that's because I have 2 particularly amazing clients there, and I see them once a year, and so they're very hungry by the time I get there, because there aren't many bookshops in Hong Kong, and so that's really the reason why. So I would say California is the best for me, but that's because there's a massive interest in printing and bookmaking there, really massive, and the libraries are very interested in it, and the individuals are very interested in it. But also that people go, the real collectors in America will be at all the fairs. And so perhaps California benefits by being the first in the year. So, you are really presenting them with fresh stock, because New York is only 3 or 4 weeks afterwards. So, the really keen guys will fly down from wherever and be in California, because they know particularly for the British dealers, it's the first big fair of the year. So they can get all the fresh stuff.
What else about the business side? Anything else that comes to mind?
Some of it's tedious. It's not all cataloguing lovely books, but
cataloguing lovely books. Is that one of your favourite parts?
Yes,
and so
totally. Research, cataloguing, really getting to the nub of what the story about that book is. And because, this is the book art, every book, even if it's printed in a few copies, has an interesting story behind it. Why did that individual printing at that press decide on that text? Or, what relationship did they have with the illustrator? Why did they choose that illustrator? And there's always a story.
Yeah.
And it's up to you to get that story out of the book. And I love that. So there's a bit of me. I'm quite gregarious. I love going to fairs, but I also just love it when I get back and I can just quietly go back to my books and be on my own.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? And it's the same with writers, I think. Their lives are, a little bit, I won't say, well, I will say schizophrenic, but the fact is that they have to go out on the road and sell their book, but they also have to write it, and I like that balance.
Yes.
Do
you like that down times and the up times?
Yeah.
I think it's harder for you. You're not dealing with an object necessarily when you're writing, and therefore, I think there's a lot of book dealers that say, "Oh, I'm going to be a writer," and but you're not. Mm-hmm. And actually, I think we're all a bit twitchy because there is this need to get out there all the time. Mm-hmm. I'm sure some genuinely are writers, but it's a lot of I've written a novel on the back of an envelope, and it's a kind of conceit that a lot of book dealers have, which you probably have found. I'm not a writer. No. I mean, I write catalogues, and I enjoy that, but I
so the essence of the catalogue then is to come up with the story. A really interesting story and a persuasive story about that book, so someone really wants to have it.
Yes.
And you present it, you photograph all the books.
I photograph every book. I'm not the world's greatest photographer, but I do photograph every book. I think you have to now, and especially because what I do is so visual. It's not someone buying a copy of a first edition when they kind of know what it looks like. They're just looking for the finer points of its condition. Every book I sell is visual, and people often will buy a new press or a new book artist or a new illustrator because they stumble across it, and they will stretch their collection that way. So it does have to be visual. So yes, you tell the story. You don't have to say too much. Always leave them being able to find something out for themselves, because
Exactly.
how boring to be told everything. So they and also that every book, you might catalogue it in one way, but they'll be interested in it because it's printed in Derby or something, not because it's printed by this particular printer or with a particular illustrator. So
they'll be coming at it from a different...
You've always got to think that when you're cataloguing it, includes the information you need. They may be trying to put a library back together, so whose book plate is in the front may matter to them. So
you just never know.
Don't presume that why everything, but you have to kind of have a sense of yourself in your catalogues, because people will either follow that or not be interested at all. But it is a very personal thing, and a lot of book dealers will say you can only sell books you love, and I totally agree with that. I mean,
Must be hard to let go of them then.
Of course, but you get used to it. I have what I call my shelves of sin, which are sort of 2 or 3 shelves in the shop of books that I sort of kind of want to own. But if I don't catalogue them, then they're not for sale. So they're sort of mine for a bit.
Okay, what's on that shelf?
Oh, well, I mean, I showed you earlier, which obviously anyone listening to this hasn't seen, but I am putting together little collections of Victorian illuminated manuscripts, and what I didn't show were books which were illustrated with original photographs, probably they'd be local histories quite often. There'd be a sort of jobbing photographer going around the country who would take a picture of the local church and the town hall and whatever, and there are a lot of books around like that they used original photographs as illustrations in these little tiny books.
Were they beautifully made books, or just
not particularly, just bound
photographs?
in cloth, but their illustrations were photographs.
And that's what,
because they would be printed in very small numbers, and they would they would either inspired by, I don't really know how it works, why I collect things is to think about them. They either the photographer came round and they thought, oh well, let's do a history of the parish church or something, or it was commissioned. I don't really know the answer, but so lots of things like that. But also just if I have a really beautiful book, perhaps a manuscript or something, I just don't really want to get rid of quite yet. I'll just sit on it for a bit.
You want to be a custodian for a while.
Yeah, and also sometimes you don't really understand something, and until you suddenly will read something somewhere, and suddenly you'll go, oh gosh, I know exactly what that image is. Because it wasn't a sign, maybe a painting or a print that isn't signed, and yet you recognise it and you're convinced it's somebody, and then suddenly you read something and it all fits into place. So, that kind of thing will just be left to moulder. Some of them, obviously, I'll die with, but,
Well, hopefully not. Well, I guess you have to catalogue it first, though, right?
Oh, yeah. Before I die, yeah.
Let's get into the books, then.
Okay.
Someone who's intrigued by the book Beautiful, fine press books. Let's say they don't have a huge amount of money, but they got, I don't know, maybe $5,000-$10,000 over the course of the year, let's say, or not even that much, whatever.
Yes.
What would you recommend to them if they want to become a collector of what you specialise in?
Well, I have a very interesting customer who's a bit like that, who is just a teacher, doesn't earn very much, and every year he will buy one really good book. He might pay me in bits over the year for it. Yeah. And I quite like his attitude, is that, he's very interested in the Golden Cockerel Press, and rather than just buy the ordinary edition, he'll buy one special copy. Well, no, they did sort of specially bound. They usually did about 100 specially bound copies in Morocco, some with suites of plates, some not. And he will buy one...
Suites of plates?
Well, so they would have the plates in the book with an extra suite, an extra set of the plates, loose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And he'll buy one of those every year. And I really admire that.
Just the Golden Cockerel, so he's focused.
Well, not particularly. It might be something else that he really loves or whatever. But he might buy 2. If he's had a good year. But
something really, really
he's
special.
now 50 something, and has got a pretty beautiful little cabinet of beautiful things.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
And if you are greedier than that or need more, there are plenty of presses that you can buy say, the ordinary copies of Golden Cockerel, or even Dubs Press for hundreds rather than thousands. And so all I would say is, if you are buying at that level, you don't want to spend masses and masses, always buy the best copy you can find. Mm-hmm. Even if it's paying £100 more or something, because you will never regret buying the better copy. Yeah. But, there are smaller presses. You can buy the ephemera of some presses for not very much money, which, you're getting the printing, you're getting the paper. Quite often you're getting one of the wood engravings in the book printed from the block, if there's a prospectus or something like that. So there are lots of ways of doing it if you're interested in particular presses. And you can be more varied. You're not ever going to be a completist if you have some distant uncle in Australia who dies who you've never met, who leaves you a fortune. You might be able to buy everything, but that may never happen to you. So you can then sort of have a variety of books from each press or anything that interests you, and go down lots of avenues. So it isn't. A lot of people say the middle market's dead, which is sort of the hundreds. Books in the hundreds, and it is absolute twaddle. It's not true. If you put it out there and you treat those books with as much respect as books in the thousands, people buy them and they enjoy them and they love them.
You treating them with respect,
yes,
and putting them out there.
Yeah. And telling their story as much as telling the story of a Kelmscott Chaucer, because in fact, in a way, the Kelmscott Chaucer needs less of a story. We all know its story. Yeah. But you don't know the story of the £150 book from the Golden Cockerel Press that no one really cares about. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But until you suddenly go, well, actually, this illustrator was really interesting and they trained with blah, 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 and whatever, and you suddenly see the whole link of everything linking up.
Well, it's a bit like collecting Ernest Hemingway. I mean, everyone knows about him, and the prices are astronomical. But if you got a lot of money, pretty easy to go after them. It doesn't take much thought or creativity or initiative, really. No,
you're right. I mean, but then obviously, the really interested collector goes deeper than that, and they'll find people that influenced him, or artifacts that he had, or books that he might have read, or really clever intellectual collector will always go further than that. There's always the trophy hunter, but they probably don't last very long. They buy books for 2 years and then they go and buy Ferraris and then they go and buy whatever, I said dismissively. But, if you're nuts about Ernest Hemingway or whatever, yes, you will buy those things, but then you're always going to, if you've got all the money in the world, you're going to try and get the really interesting things inscribed to somebody or letters or whatever. So, there's, if you apply your mind to it, you can do amazing things.
I think, that's the thing about collecting, is it's really... it's up to you if you can find something that not all that many other people want, but that connects to a love of yours or a passion. You don't have to spend a huge ton of money.
No, you really don't. And also that the mass of them gives them more interest, so if you can tell the story of collecting, there's lots of book collecting prizes now for students. And a lot of them women. And a lot of them are starting with nothing. I mean, they've got no money. They've got, them going along to the local second-hand bookshop, which is in fact how a lot of book dealers start. And, just finding a thread. And it's a kind of curation, I suppose. And there is no need to spend a lot of money. If you love it, it doesn't really matter. It's not about the high rollers. I mean, you go to some of these book fairs and you might think that's the case, but it is about the person who pursues their interest and passionately, and they just eat baked beans for a month because they found something they really desperately want that's a bit over their usual budget. But that I do if you look at, you can find them, I think, online, all the different sort of book collecting prizes. There's a lot. I think Yale does one, and there's one at Oxford, and some schools have them.
There's also I'm trying to remember what it is. It's like bees and honey, or
honey and wax. They do one.
They've just done one. They just come out with one.
They do one every year, and all those things are published online, so they can give you ideas if you want to start collecting. Give you ideas, and and think about different avenues. Even if you're interested in the book arts, you just collect bits of type. Find typography that interests you, or if it's bits of calligraphy, just collect little pieces of it. You don't have to have...
So where would you find that? You just go dig through...
Just go to book fairs. But go to shops. Go where you always would go.
And just ask for ephemera.
And don't be embarrassed going into... if you find a dealer who like the look of their things, don't be embarrassed to call them up. I know most dealers are by appointment now, so, it is harder than it used to be. But, don't be embarrassed to call them up and talk to them, because they're there because they love doing what they do. Mm-hmm. Very few of them are cold businessmen. We're all crazy. So, we like other crazy people, so we feel normal. Yes. And, so if you ever were to sort of think, oh, I'd be interested in that, just go and see them. No one minds you poking through their things. It's fine.
What do you love? I mean, one of the questions I ask is, what's the best? But that's just kind of a silly question, because the best is different for almost everyone.
Yeah.
Then there's the quality of the printing.
Yes.
Can you get anywhere near that? Like, is this press better than that press, or do you want to go there with that?
Oh, you see, I quite like a bit of sort of imperfection.
Yes. Well, that's it. Yeah. So who do you like?
Oh, lots of people have different views, and everybody, and mine change all the time, because obviously I'm dealing with it all the time. At the moment, Ashendene Press is very fashionable, and of course, he was a very wealthy man who ran it, and he was able to buy all the best ingredients and all the best, all the best printing, whatever. But I really, I don't know. I still love the Doves Press. I love the purity of it.
The purity and what? The minimalism, kind of, or what?
He's a fascinating man. I mean, bonkers, but fascinating.
Who's this?
Cobden-Sanderson.
Yeah. Who chucked his type into
Who chucked his type. Well, it wasn't his type. That was the problem.
That's right.
But he did chuck it all into the...
His partner was Emery
Walker, who designed it. So, you would be a bit annoyed. Yeah. But he chucked it matrix by matrix into the Thames over weeks, months. And so that no one could sully it. It was so he didn't want bad literature printed in his type.
Wow.
So he would be turning in his grave now. It's been digitised.
Against his wishes, obviously.
Clearly.
Yeah. So this guy's, I think Green is his name, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's a fascinating man.
Yes,
fascinating man.
But
I went foraging in the mud and whatever.
But he's contradicting the wishes of this.
But then, as he didn't own it, maybe it doesn't really matter.
True enough. he was.
I mean, Emery Walker might have digitised it, so you can decide which side you're on, really.
Yeah.
But technically, I suppose the type could be used for an ad, which would have made the vegetarian socialist Cobden-Sanderson quite annoyed. Which is kind of perfect in a way. I mean, it's wonderful. But so yes, no, I do love that. I also love some very fine calligraphy. I also, in fact, yesterday I just went to the Burne-Jones exhibition, which has just opened at the Tate, which is splendid if you have time.
I'm going to do that. I've got one day. I'll do it.
And I have never felt the need to open, try and rip a case open to get something out more. I saw there was a Rubaiyat in there. Obviously, just open at one page. And you could kind of see that it was bound beautifully, but you can only just see the edges of it. And you can only just see one page of it. But William Morris, for one of their patrons, William Morris had written out the Rubaiyat. I mean, just exquisitely. He was a wonderful calligrapher.
Well, he was so wonderful at so many of these different arts, wasn't he? He spent the time to...
It's what you did before TV. We all now just watch box sets. But, so there was a Rubaiyat written out by him with beautiful letters and little images and whatever, with paintings, by small paintings by Burne-Jones. Apparently throughout it, but I could only see one page. You've got these amazing little paintings and the beautiful calligraphy and the vellum, and you could just see the edge of it. And so I want that book, if you could arrange that. And
okay. So that's the Kelmscott?
No, it's just it's a manuscript. It's a Morris manuscript, but it was bound.
Oh, okay.
So it's a manuscript of the whole of the Rubaiyat.
Ah, yes. Okay.
And so,
got it.
but we could only see 2 pages.
Yeah,
it was killing.
Okay.
You're like, I need, you don't understand. I need to see that. I need to have that, but obviously that's not going to happen, but I need to see that. I'm rather hoping that it might be owned by somebody. One day I might get to go and have a look through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that would do me. If I wanted, that would do me. That would make me very happy. Yes.
Okay. A bit more about Cobden-Sanderson. Yeah.
Yes.
Please.
A bit more about him.
Yeah.
He was crazy. I mean, he believed that his sort of bookmaking would make him one with the universe, the cosmos.
There's a Canadian fine press, the Eliquando Press.
Yeah.
And I think he did something on...
A lot of people do stuff on Cobden-Sanderson.
Yeah. Like, what kind of stuff do they do on him?
Well, really, quite often repeating his...
He's written about books.
His theory. I mean, he has the thesis, the book Beautiful. And it's all about the harmony of the whole. Really, the end of it is it makes him one with the cosmos because it is the harmony of humanity with the paper and the print and the binding and the illustration or the lack of illustration, which he preferred, and illumination or the use of initials. And he was really trying to get this harmonious whole. I mean...
And these are found in the Doves?
Yes, yeah. You can get a copy of the book Beautiful, which is a sort of little... It's just a little theory, but it's a few pages, printed at the Doves Press. Okay. But so you can see that anywhere, that his theories about it. Mm-hmm.
So can you get the can you just get the... It was
printed and bound, or there's a broadside that he also printed that were...
By the Doves Press?
By the Doves Press.
I see. And that's not...
But you can see it, in the bibliography, or you can look it up anywhere. But it's really about the harmony. Okay. It's about the all the different pieces coming together as a whole, which is the sort of theory of the arts and crafts movement in books.
Okay. Who else?
Who else? Well, there's modern presses. I like colour.
Yeah, let's stick with the old ones first.
Okay, well, there's Kelmscott Press.
Yeah.
Very busy, some people say.
Yeah, it's too much for me.
But fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. That whole thing that, there he was in Emery Walker's lecture.
And they
walked home together. Then they walked home together, and then the Kelmscott Press was born. And of course, it was the culmination of everything that Morris had done all his life, all of the medievalism and his own writing, and the idea of, it actually was all craft. It was all people working, but doing something beautiful with work. So, the binders and the people who made the paper and the people who cast the type and everything.
And the fulfillment that they get from doing such a thing.
The fulfillment of that, that your work should be fulfilling. And so it was sort of the idea of the yokel workman, really. I mean, it was all very condescending in a way, but very beautiful too, that all these people would come together to make these amazing books.
And he wanted to keep the price down so everyone could afford them.
Yeah, but it was all relative.
Yeah.
By everyone, I'm not quite sure what he was really meaning. But of course, they were expensive.
At the time.
And so that's why these books have been so well preserved, as they were all expensive at the time.
And so the people that bought them
we'll be going, be careful with those. They'd say to the next generation, don't just chuck those around. Those were expensive. And, they're fairly rare and whatever. So, you do... a lot of them didn't go by the wayside, and a lot of them are quite well preserved, and they really have survived quite well. And the use of vellum as a binding, obviously, it's quite tough, things like that. So so he was amazing. And then of course Cobden-Sanderson completely refuted everything and said that's all busy and dreadful, but respectfully waited till Morris died before he started printing his own. And then you've got the Ashendene Press, which is everything sort of individual. I think why people really love the Ashendene Press is it's not a homogeneous whole. You don't quite look at it in the same way. So Doves Press, it's Doves Press.
Yeah, you can put a line of them together and they
they match, kind of thing. And then Ashendene Press, it was all very different. And he was a businessman, And he understood that, so he did sort of whimsical things like, I'm going to print this in 16 copies, which is going to kill the collectors, and and even writes that in his bibliography, which is quite funny. And I think it's
Who's this again?
This is St John Hornby. So that was, I think, Bacon's Old Gardens is 16 copies. One of them is 16 copies, and of course that's going to kill a collector. And of course, even further than that, a lot of them were hand rubricated and stuff, so that they're all slightly different. And I have a collector of mine at the moment is actually looking at all these things. He's a very interesting man in Hong Kong, and he's looking at all these different books. And he showed me some pictures the other day of a very sort of not ordinary, but a small Ashendene Press book, and there were two different first pages, really, because the initials were by Grayley Hewitt, and he'd done totally different initials. And you've always just assumed they're all the same because you never see them together. And of course the Song of Songs, which were all hand illuminated by Florence Kingsford, and they're all different. But no one's really seen them side by side. So although we know they're all different,
they're all different from book to book?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, some of the first pages...
So they're unique books then?
So they're basic. So they had a certain amount printed, and then these amazing borders, which were illuminated. So some of them have lions, some of them have peacocks, some of them have serving girls, some of them have, some of them have oranges, some of them have apples. They're amazing, but no one's ever, So I've had a few in my time, but I can't really remember. The earlier ones, you couldn't just take pictures with your iPhone. So, no one's ever really put them together. But this is the guy in Hong Kong is going to do it. I can see he's got that diligence and fascination with the whole thing, and a very fine collection. But
persistence too.
Yeah, and also he's just lovely. So people are going to very happily open the doors and let him have a look at everything. He's truly interested. So hopefully he'll do that. That's really interesting. So nothing's. Maybe that's part of the appeal of it all, that it is so handmade.
Yeah.
And nothing's, I suppose. Nothing is the same.
When you talked about the sort of the differences, I'm put in mind of the Nonesuch Press, Francis Maynell.
Yes, and that was all very varied, wasn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So do you deal in that?
Yeah, a bit. It's obviously a much bigger limitation of everything.
Yeah, it's not
and it's
a fine
become
press, is it?
Well, some of them are beautiful. You get the Don Quixote with the McKnight Kaufman's illustrations. That's amazing. The Dante's beautiful. The Herodotus, incredible. Of course, they're all in that very sort of thick boards and vellum, so it means they all bow like crazy. But it is a really interesting press because it does go all over the place. And some things are beautiful, and some things are text and so it is interesting, but obviously it doesn't, because of the large limitation, they don't keep their value like the necessarily. But obviously things like Don Quixote, they've gone up a lot because McKnight Kaufman's reputation has gone up a lot. So for all these sort of different reasons, things keep their value or don't. Or the Dickens keeps its value very well with the extra plate that was from the original. All those kind of things do very well, but Nonesuch goes up and down. People are less completist than they used to be. They used to be very completist about it, but I think the internet changed that with the things with bigger limitations. Because when you look up and you see, I can always get a copy of this. There will always be one out there. There were 1,500 copies. Whatever. There will always be one out there. It takes the pal off for people. They don't necessarily want that, so they
want the rarity.
They want the rarity.
But again, someone who doesn't have a huge budget, it's a kind of an interesting press to go after.
Beautifully produced.
Yeah.
All the same theories of production and beautiful paper and good binding, and all those same theories are there. But I think a lot of people really start, I suppose in this country a lot of people start with the Folio Society, which does sort of not very limited books, but when you're young you start to get the theory of the whole. And then they'll quite often, that you get these sort of limited edition books, but that they've got nice illustrations, a good binding. You're progressing on from your paperback in the bookshop, and then people will quite often go and start. Golden Cockerel is a very obvious next step, really.
from the Folio Society.
From Folio Society, or Limited Editions Club, or whatever is the equivalent.
Well, some of those are
some of those are really magnificent, and also
and signed too.
And also, if you go back in the Folio Society's history, some of those, really are remarkable and quite rare. Just because they're sort of doing a lot now, it doesn't mean that that's not how it always was.
Right.
And also, some of the things they do now are magnificent facsimiles of things and things.
And they won the Victoria and Albert book design.
Yeah. I mean, there's design. It is quite a good place to start if you've, not got, you just want to get a really nice copy of something, a book that you really like. But it is quite often a route for people, and I think similarly in America with limited editions stuff, that was quite a route. I mean, I don't know now, but I think in the past, and it's just that people who, if they were young, started to buy those, they just had that instinct, that aesthetic.
And Maino was connected to the limited editions club.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, so it is all that sort of the idea of beautiful books, and why do people have to read things with horrible print and horrible paper?
Anything in between sort of the last 20 years and limited editions and the Nonesuch that we should be aware of?
Well, there's all sorts of things really going on all the time. I mean, there's lots of sort of people producing things in very small numbers. There's in America there's a lot of presses, Allen Press, Grabhorn Press. Over here, Stanbrook Abbey, these kind of little, smaller presses, but also things printed at the Kerwin Press.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
I mean, that's not technically a private press, but you are dealing with beautifully produced books, and you can get those very cheaply.
Simon Oliver was.
And so, all the way through, and then I think that what's going on now is fascinating. There's a whole reflowering of fine printing and fine presses. I mean, what I would call fine presses as opposed to private presses, I think that's just a distinction that makes things a bit easier.
I mean, the difference between a fine press and a private press, I don't think there is when they're interchangeable.
There really isn't, but I think that sort of private press books has now got a connotation that it means Kelmscott, Doves, Ashendene, that kind of era.
I see.
And I think that I would probably now, for ease of reference, say what's happening now is fine press. I think that's how people describe themselves too. It is the Fine Press Book Association, not the Private Press Book Association. Because private press also encompasses earlier stuff that you would just print privately. And I think that the era that we think of as private press, it was private press, but it's not quite right. I think fine press is perhaps better description, because private press also just meant you were publishing your own poems, and it not necessarily on good paper, not necessarily beautifully thought about. You're just privately printing something, and so fine press I think probably is more descriptive.
Okay, so who comes to mind then now?
Gaylord Schanilec, Midnight Paper Sales, great favourite of mine.
What makes him so good?
He is a brilliant artist, but more than that, everything is conceived. He's a true artist, and everything is conceived as a whole. His books are conceived as a whole. They have a theory behind them. They have a principle behind them.
Like his beautiful the rings of the trees. I love that one.
Yes, that Sylvain is a masterpiece. Yeah. But it all had this theory, so that all those trees had to come from his own property.
That's right.
And he, just engraved them a little bit more to make them easier to print, not just printing straight from the wood, it was engraved, but, with using the wood. But the whole thing is just beautiful. There's that wonderful picture in it. I don't know if you've ever seen it, of the tall maple tree, which I think now provides all his blocks. All his blocks come from that tree, so he always engraves on maple.
There's kind of an environmental feel to it.
Yeah,
as well.
I mean, he is thorough in the woods. Then he's developing too. It's not just stuck, because you do see some people just get stuck in there. This is what I produce. This is what I make money out of. It's fine. And him, it's nothing to do with the money. It's the next project. And I think he is the real thing. And also that he understands how the page should look, he understands how the binding should look, he doesn't do it himself, which is but he understands how to make everything. Obviously, he prints the pages, but he doesn't do the binding.
Yeah.
But he understands the whole thing, and it's all from the heart. It's the most passionate bit of bookmaking ever. Amazing. Another one I would think of is Ron King at the Circle Press. Well, he's British.
Where is he located?
He's now down near Chichester, but he's been going for a long time, since the 60s. And he really, if you really to look back at why the fine press movement is so buoyant now, he was a large part of it. He inspired a lot of people. He's the most well. You should look him up. Ron King at the Circle Press.
Okay.
I'll show you some books.
Yeah.
And he's brilliant, but also just inspires people. And also was a guy who just got on the road, round America to all the libraries, and sold his books.
That must have been a fun road trip.
It was amazing. He was tough, and he went and sold his books, but,
Is he still alive?
He is still alive. He'd be a very interesting person to talk to.
That's why I asked.
He really would be very interesting, because he really, now all the libraries buy this stuff, and that's why all the fine presses are surviving, the libraries in America, and he is the reason. And his work's stupendous, and it's moved and it's changed, and his latest book is incredible. It's all blind printed, and it's a sort of Inuit story about sea goddess. But he did these incredible early books in the 60s with great big silk screen prints, and so he's an artist, but he also loves poetry. So he's worked very closely with a lot of very important poets. And so it's the conceiving of the book as a whole and really understanding what he's doing. He's not just an artist, he's an artist who creates things, and so you can touch his prints and, that whole connection. It is something very immediate, isn't it? Really.
A bit ephemeral, I'm not really sure. It's hard to grasp that concept, really, but the fact when you say it's a whole, what exactly does that mean?
So when you pick up the book, it's not just a text with illustration. You feel they've really it's been thought through. The illustrations and the text are very closely related. They've thought about the right paper to print it on, the right font to use to make the poems make sense, the right place on the page. They've designed the whole thing. It comes from one person's mind, I think, is what I'm trying to say. And in fact, like the early presses.
Well, I was going to say, when you say private press, typically that means one person's vision. Okay, that's great. I'm learning here. I'd never heard of him. No,
he's really, really special, really important, really important.
Okay. Who else?
Who else? Well, it's the Barbarian Press. They're brilliant.
A little shout out to Canada there.
Really excellent, beautifully produced. There's so many. Probably a visit to Codex or something is recommended.
Which is California.
In February.
Every 2 years, right?
Every 2 years, and it's this February.
Okay.
That mixes artist books too, which may be less interesting to people interested in press books. But there's a lot of people there from all over the world.
Right.
And so it's a sort of growing thing, really, growing movement. There's the Old School Press here. I think that's amazing. Very quiet people, but really produce beautiful books in Britain, in Devon. I think they are now. They've just moved, so I think they're in Devon.
Old School
Press, and they're far from old school.
right. Kind of an ironic.
They're really good with colour. In fact, they've produced 2 books on colours of the Cyclades, and one in Rome. Which different colours of really getting into depth of the theory of colour, but using great swashes of colour and everything handmade. It's beautiful, really, but quiet. Nothing. They don't sort of shout from the rafters. They just absolutely perfectly produce books. Yeah. Affordable, very affordable. In fact, fine presses in Britain tend to be more affordable than fine presses in America. We don't have the libraries, and it's a sort of not inflated market. Definitely affordable way, quite an interesting way in. to maybe collect some of the old stuff and then start looking at the new stuff and see what you can afford, because there's some very young people coming up who've got very interesting work.
Do you think, this is a question I ask quite often, because I get conflicting views on this. Do you think that the generation, everyone's young compared to me now,
yeah, we do.
But is there a real growing interest in the tactile, the book as object?
Yes, I think there is.
I think there is. Isn't there?
I think people are more visual now.
Are there as many collectors as there were before, or not?
Yeah, always. There aren't that many collectors ever at any one time.
Okay, right.
I think that's the thing to remember.
Yeah.
But I think that forever, I think in 1790, whenever it was, when Lackington wrote a book about bookselling, and he complained that... Have you got it? Well, he was complaining. There were no collectors anymore, no good books. Everything was too expensive. Nobody wanted anything. Yeah. It was all over. And, 240 years later or whatever, it's all still going. And I think there's always people. But I do think that people are... I think artists are very interested in making books.
That's a whole other world.
No, the origami books kind of thing. Yeah, that is a whole other world. But there is, also, photo books are fascinating. A lot of people are doing those in very small numbers, very beautifully produced, very beautifully printed. They might be digitally printed, but this is the new form of printing, isn't it? So,
how... You know of the Lumiere Press?
No, I don't know Lumiere. No. Obviously, I need to know. There we are.
You do.
But, so there are people producing new printing techniques, and all of that's fascinating. And so, it's all developing and going on and on and on. Yes, there's always an audience for it, but I think there is an increasing audience for it. But obviously, price points are important too. So if you produce something for £40, a lot of people will buy it, but you probably can't afford to do the very, very beautiful thing on very, very beautiful paper for that kind of money.
But what you're recommending, it seems to me, is if you've got a certain budget, probably better off putting it all into one really good book than to sort of spread it all over the place.
Unless that's how it takes you.
Yeah.
For instance, the Auchincloss collection that we were talking about earlier, it was a man who was obviously fascinated by fine presses across the world and fine printing and typography across the world, and his books go from £10 to £10,000, and he was a man of means, but he understood this is interesting because it's this. Mm-hmm. So, don't collect as an investment, I suppose, is the big thing. Yeah, so if you're interested in German typography, there are plenty of cheap German typographic books you can buy that were trade books, but, they're still beautifully printed and beautifully designed with beautiful covers, So I think that there's no reason, go as broad as you want. Yes, if you know what press you absolutely love and you want... Yes, buy one book at a time. Yeah. But otherwise, go very broad and, pursue whatever avenue you're pursuing. Nothing will stop a book collector, really.
Well,
collectors are collectors. We meet them when they're young, and you know it. You know your child's a collector from day one.
Okay. Thanks for a beautiful interview.
Well, thank you very much for coming all the way here. It's been lovely to meet you.
What's your website address?
It's www.ssrbooks.com.
Okay, Sophie Schneideman. Fine press and private press books. Go there. Thanks very much.
Thank you.